So hello class, today we're going to talk about the supply, the seller side of the market. So just like demand, there are certain concepts that we have to know first. One is the quantity supply. Just like quantity demanded, there's also a quantity supply. And it is the amount that the sellers are willing and able to sell at the market. And from there we have the law of supply. The law of supply says that the quantity supply will rise when prices go up. Also, the quantity supplied will fall if prices go down, all else being equal. So from here, we can actually come up with the supply schedule. Just like the demand schedule, supply schedule is a table that shows the relationship between price of a product and the quantity that the sellers are willing and able to supply to the market. So in this case, we ask Starbucks how much are they willing and able to supply at different prices. So when price is $0, of course, they are not willing to supply anything because, they don't make any money out of it. But as prices rise, as we can see, the quantity supplied of lattes also go up. So this shows that Starbucks is following the law of supply because there is a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied. So if you notice, the supply schedule of Starbucks obeys the law of supply, which is great. I mean, that's what we hope to see in among sellers. So again, looking at the supply schedule does not really help us. So what we try to do is then look at it graphically. And so when we do that, we plot each point on the graph. And so just like before, just for the demand curve, we always put the price on the vertical axis and the quantity on the horizontal axis. So in this case too, we always, for the supply curve too, we always want to put the price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. So when price is 0, the quantity supplied is 0, and the green dot shows that point. As price rises to $1, the quantity supplied is 3. As price rises to 2, the quantity supplied is 6, and so on. So when we join all the points with a line, we get something called a supply curve. So this is the supply curve of an individual supplier. So if there's just one supplier in the market, this is what the supply curve will look like. Again, that was for individual supply curve. Now, if we wanted of the market, because there's not just one coffee shop in the market, there can be multiple coffee shops. You can have Starbucks, you can have Caribou Coffee, you can even have Dunkin' Donut coffee, McDonald's coffee, many options for coffee. So the quantity supplied in the market is just like quantity just the same way as we derived a market demand curve, we derive the market supply curve in a very similar way. So supposing now instead of just Starbucks in the market, we have Starbucks and Peet's. So in that case, this is the supply schedule of Starbucks. Now let's say we ask Pete, okay, what is the amount they're willing and able to supply to the market at different prices? Again, just like the demand side, when we looked at it, Pete's quantity supplied is different from that of Starbucks, which shows that Peet's may not be able to supply as much as Starbucks for each and every price. So after that, for each price, we ask how much the market is going to supply. So at price 0, Starbucks provides 0, Peet's provides 0, so the market quantity supplied is 0 units at price 0. At price 1, when price is $1, the market quantity supplied is 3 plus 2, which is 5. At $2, it is 10, and so forth. So basically what we're doing for each price, we are summing up all the individual quantity supplied of each seller, and that is the market quantity supplied. So now when we plot that, the market quantity supplied with the on price, and in a graph, we get a straight line like that. The straight line is also obeying the law of supply because as price goes up, our quantity supplied also goes up. So we have the market supply curve. Now, just like the demand curve, we said that, the supply curve, there's a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied, all else being equal. But the other things being equal are non-price determinants of supply. And there are certain things that can affect how much a seller is able to supply in the market. And so we're going to see some of the changes in the supply curve right now. And so one of the changes is input prices. Okay, input prices are things that the sellers have to purchase. Inputs are the things that the seller has to purchase to produce the output. So in the case of making lattes, a seller has to purchase coffee beans, has to purchase milk, has to purchase, let's say, even water, and also not only that, has to pay wages to the workers, has to pay rent on the place where their coffee shop is located. So all those things are input prices. A fall in input prices, when input prices go down, makes production cheaper. So if coffee prices suddenly fell from $3 a pound to $2 a pound, now I can actually purchase more coffee beans. So I can produce more at a cheaper price. So when that happens, it's more profitable for the firm to supply a larger quantity. And the supply curve shifts to the right. So how does that happen? Let's look at that. So if we are drawing, if initially the supply curve was, so if this is my price, this is my quantity. If initially this is the supply curve, and if input prices decrease, that means it's cheaper for me to produce the product. The supply curve for each and every price I can produce more. So now the supply curve will shift to the right to S prime. Okay, now if there was a rise in input price, let's say if instead of a fall in input price, if there was a rise, then it would make production less profitable. So it would be less profitable at each and every output price because now I got to pay more money to buy my inputs. So the firm will then supply a smaller quantity. Okay, my handwriting, of course, is not so good. So supply curve will then shift to the left. So how is that going to look? So if we draw that part, if this is my price, this is my quantity, then if this is my supply curve, and if input prices rise, then my supply curve will shift to the left to S prime, just like that. So that's what happens when input prices change. Now if we look at another thing, technology. Technology determines how we produce the product. So how our inputs are converted to outputs. So if we somehow introduce a cost-saving technology, so if the technology can reduce costs, so for example, let's say before the coffee shop used to grind coffee beans manually by hand, and now they got a machine to grind the coffee beans. So now it's much cheaper and quicker to grind coffee beans. So that improvement may have the same effect as a fall in input prices, and that could shift the supply curve to the right. If there's a technological improvement that actually increases costs, and there could be some instances of that, then that could cause the supply curve to shift to the left. The number of sellers, as we just saw, does have an effect. If there's more sellers in the market, then supply will, of course, for each and every price, there will be more being quantity supplied in the market, so supply curve will shift to the right. If there's less sellers in the market, supposing something happens and sellers leave the market, then there will be exit of sellers, and that's going to cause less amount being supplied at each and every price. So supply curve is going to shift to the left. Sorry, expectations. Supposing something happens in the Middle East that leads to expectations of higher oil prices. So we expect like, okay, maybe some kind of a conflict happening in the Middle East. So something bad might happen, and so we expect oil prices to rise in the future. Now, if I'm a supplier of oil, let's say in the US, And if I know that prices are going to rise in the future, then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to wait for a few months to sell my products in the future because I'll make more money if I hold on to the product. Instead of selling it right now, I can wait a few months and sell it in the future. So when that happens, if I'm not selling the product today, it's going to reduce supply of that product today. So that's going to cause supply to shift to the left. So in general, sellers adjust supply when their expectations of future price changes. So again, if I expect winter, if I'm a seller and I expect the winter going to be very cold again, then I'm going to start not selling any winter clothes during fall. I'm going to hold on to them and then wait until winter comes. So that's going to reduce supply of winter clothing in the fall. So here's a summary of what we just looked. So whenever there's a change in price, it just causes a movement across along the supply curve. An increase in price does not shift the supply curve. When input prices change, it shifts the supply curve. When technology changes, it shifts the supply curve, number of sellers, and expectations. So all these factors shifts the supply curve. Nothing else will shift the supply curve. So the factors we studied in the demand slides and the factors we studied in the supply curve, supply side, only those things will change the demand and supply curves. So in the next video, what we're going to see is what happens when you superimpose demand and supply curves together, and how can we predict changes in prices based on what we observe around us.